Hello folks, you're with Tacitus Today on your Pushback channel, pushing back against crazy SJW political correctness. And thank you for watching. And while you're with us, please take a moment to subscribe below. This video essay addresses how it came to be that whites have been in the clear global technical and economic ascendant for more than 350 years. Is it from hard work and ingenuity, pure accident, the patriarchy, or even badass good luck? So let's look at why 97% of all modern technical inventions and innovations are made by whites, and what's more, white males. The term white privilege is frequently put about by cultural Marxist activists, yet applied so broadly and ideologically we can now accept it as being just one more activist way of silencing others who do not toe the cultural Marxist SJW line. Yet in modern history at least, whites and white majority nations have economically outperformed all other nations on a per capita GDP basis, and often in absolute terms. In the early 1900s, for example, and even when adjusted for purchasing power parity, the GDP economies of France or Britain or Germany were bigger than the economy of China and bigger than the entire economy of Africa. Depending on which sector of the economy, European workers were producing between 11 and 25 times the equivalent of workers in any other region on the planet. Productivity differentials as vast as these do make a huge difference to wealth and how wealth disperses and concentrates. Yet all white wealth is illegitimate, we are told. Ignoring facts, the cultural Marxist explanation goes down the burrow of the emotional, simplistic and juvenile. The SJW assertions hold that whites just stole all the wealth from all the harp-playing, peace-loving peoples of the planet. The SJW proof relies heavily on the assertion that all wealth outcomes across all regions of the globe should have been equal, and as they were not, only white wickedness can explain the difference. The SJW Marxist position is, of course, absolute, complete nonsense of the first magnitude. It borrows heavily from 1960s Soviet disinformation propaganda, specifically designed to destabilise the West at the time. So how and why did whites as a group break away from the rest of the world and become so relatively wealthy? Europeans were the first to develop long ocean-going vessels, which was critical to the clear European commercial advantage during the mercantile age as it unfolded. The essential technological requirements were the capacity to sail into or diagonally across the wind, without which open ocean sailing was extremely difficult. To be sure, Arabic and Chinese vessel design was not so far behind, but was confined to inshore sailing, or they were only capable of sailing in open water for short journeys in the direction of the seasonal monodirectional winds. Generally, sailors would not sail out of sight of land by choice, unless in an enclosed area such as the Mediterranean or Andaman Sea. The uniquely European technological advances with sails, rigging, pulleys and boat keels meant Europeans alone could discover new wide ocean trade routes and discover new lands for trade. It was a game changer. The Arabic bloc, represented principally by the powerful Ottoman Empire of the day, held a virtual monopoly on the land-based east-west trade routes. They had little or no incentive to consider open ocean voyages. Similarly, Chinese maritime travel was based primarily on coastal and short distance or semi-enclosed sea navigation. The effect of the mercantile age on world economics, and remember this was primarily a European undertaking, and the balance of power or regional power was manifest. Even some European nations without an empire doubled per capita GDP between 1500 and 1700, which was primarily the mercantile era, while most of the non-European nations sustained much lower rates of growth or even stagnation. At the same time, the more populous areas of the globe, such as Africa, the subcontinent and China, became locked into what later became known as the Malthusian trap. That is, at the first sign of improved prosperity, the population immediately and sharply increases through procreation. So even though total GDP might be increasing, the rate of population growth is faster than the rate of economic growth. So the per capita GDP falls, meaning individual citizens actually become poorer. The far more productive Europeans, however, could increase populations and also handily increase total and per capita GDP. To underwrite and further the professionalism of Europeans, advances were also seen in map making or cartography, bookkeeping, double column accounting, commercial finance, standardised weights and measures, metal springs, bigger, faster vessels, newspapers and technical information sharing, explosives, mechanised knitting machines, mining, land reclamation and drainage, steam-operated pumps, storage and food preservative technology and so on. All these advances in combination and in aggregation meant Europeans kept moving ahead and building greater economic momentum in the process. As Europe later industrialised, the economic gulf became even wider between Europe and the rest of the world, and Europe already had in place a global transport and trading network created during the mercantile age to absorb and distribute new industrial manufactures. When the Industrial Revolution took off in earnest between 1820 and 1840, only Europeans effectively embraced these new technologies, with such an effect that the balance of global wealth then tilted dramatically in favour of whites. By 1912, more than 55% of the world's GDP wealth was held by whites alone. Britain, Germany and the US accounted for nearly 42% of world GDP between them. In 1950, almost two-thirds of world wealth was held by whites. Yet the global distribution of wealth, while appearing one-sided, almost exactly mirrored the differentials of technical and organisational advancement along with the total productive mass. White nations produced more, created more, invented more, innovated more, traded more, and did all of these things more effectively than other nations or regions. As a proportion of total employment, white workers were hired on merit far more often than on family, tribal or crony-based economies of elsewhere. This alone made a big difference to economic outcomes, although the West is losing its advantage in this area. But how much of the wealth of majority white nations was historically due to, say, invasion or rapacious exploitation? White nations only began to demonstrate a clear per capita GDP wealth increase and economically pull away from the rest of the world from the time the Europeans established a clear technical superiority relative to other regions. The technically more advanced areas have always gained a commercial advantage over others as they can produce, manufacture, transport and distribute more effectively and efficiently. Moreover, spices from the Asian basin and the subcontinent, which were prized commodities in Europe during the mercantile and early industrial era, could be bought cheaply or even for barter in the local Asian or African regions. Even so, the investment capital required to sail ships from Europe to Asia and back again, running the hazards of weather and pirates, was considerable. The profits were high, but so were the risks. Many a ship sank in a storm with all hands on board and was never heard from again. Also consider that no Asian or African traders were sailing to Europe trying to sell their wares to Europeans, and thus they did not derive the potential benefits from undertaking such trade and commerce. Similarly, many of the raw materials essential to European manufacturing had no value to the local populations. Mineral additives to steel production, for example, attracted no interest from the natives, as they had no local steel production facility and had little or no comprehension of such advanced technology. In addition, the investment required for mining, such as roads, ports and the extractive process, was all at the expense of the European business interests. In the case of the ports, the roads, the rail, these were infrastructure that otherwise may never have been built, if not by those possessing the requisite technology, namely white Europeans. Simply put, whatever was acquired, bought by Europeans, was valuable to Europeans, but had no similar commercial value to the local natives, who in many instances did not even have the basis for grasping the issue conceptually as to how certain minerals or other raw materials could be extracted and turned into manufactured finished products. Moreover, a national sovereign government with sophisticated contractual laws, bills of order, bills of sale, letters of credit, double column accounting, how exactly should they deal with loose tribal groupings of, in some cases, nomadic Stone Age peoples without any written language, in a near permanent state of daily petty conflict with neighbouring tribes or regions? Many tribes had no concept of ownership, particularly ownership regarding land or the resources upon it or under it. Peoples used to stone or wooden tools and arrowheads made from bone would have been filled with wonder when presented with manufactures made from forged iron and steel, would have readily traded something that was worthless to them for what was also of low worth to Europeans, such as an iron axe, a knife, a ploughhead or a shovel. To be sure, local natives frequently took the view that they could arbitrarily change their minds or revoke the purchase when it suited them, or that the purchase had just been some short-term loan or rental. It takes no great feat of imagination to see how this would have led to instances of deadly disputation. Colonial powers in some instances, did take land from native peoples for agriculture and mining. While many natives did not engage in agriculture or did so nomadically or seasonally, relying mainly or absolutely on hunting and gathering, some local Indians, such as in the Americas for example, cultivated cornfields, grew vegetables such as squash and persimmon. Similarly, cutting down jungles and forests for large European plantations and general broadacre agriculture could have a significant effect on and at times displace the local hunter-gatherer populations. For the most part, and only with rare exception, Europeans were using land that was unused by the local natives. Obvious exceptions being seasonal nomadic hunting grounds and, say, killing local wildlife upon which the natives relied, the American bison being an example. Population density is also another key issue. The entire native population of North America was less than the population of present-day New York. The entire native population of the vast continent of Australia before European arrival was little over 1 million people, less than the modern-day mid-sized cities such as Philadelphia or Manchester or Brisbane. With such a low population density and most natives leading a nomadic or semi-nomadic existence, European explorers could quite literally travel for days without seeing any natives, and vast areas were invitingly uninhabited and unused and available to be put to productive use by the Europeans. Why were Europeans the first and only part of the globe to spontaneously industrialise? Wealth followed industrialisation, yet any nation or region could have chosen to industrialise or to pursue parity with or superiority to Europeans. So why did that not happen? Only one nation did exactly that, and it was Japan. From the late 1850s through to the 1890s and beyond, Japan focused relentlessly on industrialising and achieved remarkable twin feats of more than doubling per capita GDP in this period and substantially increasing population by 1/3. Within 40 years, Japan had become the wealthiest per capita GDP non-European nation or non-white nation on the planet, with a vibrant manufacturing and shipbuilding industry. By 1938, Japan was less than 20 years behind Britain in economic development. By 1980, Japan was rivaling the United States in many areas of industry and technology. So it could be done to become wealthier than whites for those nations and regions prepared or able to make the effort and make the sacrifices necessary. Why did so few, or really only one nation, make such an effort or make those sacrifices at the time? The requirements for creating large wealth surpluses include a good degree of social cohesion so as to pursue a somewhat common purpose, sufficient faith and belief in key institutions, as well as accepting and having a degree of faith in the leadership of government and the key players at the socio-economic apex. Moreover, it requires a ruling class who sees their interests enhanced and not threatened or diluted, along with a single-minded pursuit of national objectives, and also a public service and a broad population consensus that this is all for the common good. European goods penetrated markets around the globe because they were generally the most technically advanced. Higher quality relative to price, they were better made, they were more reliable, cheaper to own, more durable. Moreover, with Europeans being far and away the leaders in maritime and later air transport technology, goods could be moved around quickly and cheaply to market and through to local distribution channels. In modern history, many of these requirements or preconditions for economic liftoff may seem passé for those of us who live in the first world, but even today fewer than 1/4 of all nations could demonstrate such requirements in regard to national consensus and cohesion outside of tribal and family units. In the early industrial age, perhaps 5 or 6 nations at most could foster such cohesion, and 5 of those were in Western Europe and of course the United States. Nations or regions that cannot or will not put these building blocks in place will never create the wealth and will always stay poor. Many nations did consider industrialising but rejected the notion due to various reasons, mainly down to social control, and they were more than prepared to forego economic efficiency to keep those social controls in place, as many regions still are today. Whether it was simply the motivation to do better and try harder, majority white nations technically and economically outperformed all other nations in every sphere other than perhaps spirituality. Even here, events were helped along by the very practical, no-nonsense Protestant religion, which played a significant role in underwriting social cohesion in Britain, Germany and the United States, coincidentally the richest economies of the modern industrial era. Some European nations did briefly become nations of the first rank through plunder, such as the Iberian taking of South American precious metals. Yet to a large extent, such a great influx of unearned wealth caused the local economies to become lazy and inefficient, and to engage in expensive and foolhardy acts of military adventurism. Once the easy plunder was gone, these economies actually went backwards, and before long were easily surpassed by other nations, including Britain and France. The plunder of Inca gold has captured the imagination as an example of whites stealing from brown people, but even here perspective is required. To the Inca and Aztecs, gold and silver were for ornamentation and had no commercial value in a European context, while in Europe gold and silver underwrote national currencies and became collateral for government loans and so on. So returning to cultural Marxist fantasy definitions of white privilege and postmodern utopian moral purity, it's all a load of nonsense. Whites earned and worked for global preeminence and thus by definition are deserving of such a position then and now. Collectively, we must all stare down the attempts at guilt, blaming and shaming by the taxpayer-funded cultural left and be proud of white Western technical, financial, legal, administrative, organisational and economic achievements. Are whites perfect? Of course not, but so no other race is perfect either. Perhaps the bigger question today is, why are the elected representatives of Western populations frantically taxpayer funding or tax exempting every group or academic who so viciously denounces the West, its history and its achievements? Why are Western populations paying for the privilege of being hated, and all with the approval of the politicians they elect? Ask them why. If not you, the people, who will ask the questions? This is Tacitus Today, and thank you for listening.